Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm David Wagman. I'm the Conference Committee Chairman for Renewable Energy World Conference and Expo North America. I'm also the editor of Power Engineering Magazine and Renewable Energy World North America Magazine. It's very nice to have everyone here today and to have our panel members join us as well. I'm going to introduce them in a minute, but I wanted to tell you what the premise is for this briefing that we're doing, our editor's briefing. A month ago, there was the earthquake in Haiti that took place with tremendous disaster and destruction of the infrastructure, including the electric power infrastructure. And what we saw with all the photographs was the immediate need to restore power for essential human services. It's not just in Haiti that sort of immediacy of need presents itself, but in almost any sort of major natural disaster, a man-made disaster, there's a need to restore power, first of all, and then to do a long-term recovery of the infrastructure. And it makes sense to me, as editor of a couple of magazines and being involved with a conference, that there's a core responsibility and opportunity that manufacturers and professionals in this industry have to be ready as part of the first response team that goes into a disaster in order to provide various types of, say, either diesel or gas-powered sources of backup power and emergency generation, renewable type power that can be brought in on an emergency basis, and then also to begin to think about long-term restoration and recovery and the role that in particular that renewable energy can play in rebuilding. So what we've done is brought together a couple of folks who are going to share some of their thoughts on both the utility role and the disaster preparedness and planning role in terms of this topic, and then also to discuss a specific example that's taking place right now of a tornado that took out an entire town in Kansas a couple of years ago, and that's being rebuilt with green and renewable resources. So let me introduce Cheryl Mealy, who is the Chief Operating Officer of Austin Energy. And Austin Energy, of course, is our host utility sponsor, so I need to say thank you very much for your support of this conference. It's very nice to have you here today. She's going to be talking a bit about her utility and the role that her utility has with the state of Texas disaster planning and emergency preparedness and some of the mutual response agreements that are underway. Then we also have Shanti Pless, who is a former colleague of mine with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and he is spearheading, leading up a lot of efforts from NREL with the rebuilding that's taking place in Greensburg, Kansas, and is going to talk about how that process is moving forward and what's taking place. We want to involve you in the audience also. This is not just me throwing questions and doing an interview. If you have specific things as we talk, if you've got questions that you'd like to ask our panel members, we are going to have time. In order to do that, we've got a microphone that we'll be able to circulate to you, and feel free to take part in it. So thanks very much for coming, and let's begin. And Cheryl, I wonder if you could talk at a high level about the kinds of disaster preparedness and how a utility such as Austin Energy is involved in state efforts to prepare for disasters.
Right, sure. First of all, and most of our pre-planning for any emergency is really done locally. Here in Austin, we have an emergency operations center with which the highway department, all of our emergency crews, state, local utilities, and all kinds of agencies do come together and work on what are our plans for emergency response. And often, as you said, the electric utility is a big part of that. A lot of our emergency and disaster planning certainly focuses on weather. And so even yesterday, here in Austin, we had our once in a blue moon kind of event with snow. We were very fortunate it didn't turn into ice, because typically that's what will bring our system to a quick halt. But we do work very closely with all of those agencies throughout the year, and especially during emergencies, to make sure that we all know what our role is. What are our priorities in terms of any restoration? Our hospitals, our schools, our large businesses, the infrastructure that's needed to have available during any emergency is always our first priority. And so we're keenly aware of where are those facilities located. We don't wait to find out what feeder something's on until the day of the disaster. We keep very close handle on what feeders, what substations, what transmission lines have to be in service in order to make sure that we sustain all of the emergency facilities in the city. So we work a lot and under the direction during any major crisis, especially early on, to focus on those. We get the feedback, we get the input from the fire department, the police department, other state agencies that have facilities that need to be up and powered and identified again in advance, so that when we see what's happening in our system, we very quickly can begin to make the plan for how long before we can restore that specific operation or that specific area. So that's kind of some of the local piece that the utility steps in with. The other piece that I think is important on a regional basis is we work closely with other utilities to be prepared and understand the crews, the contractors, and the process by which we can release our crews to another region. When a hurricane occurs, Katrina, Ike, Rita, we've had plenty of opportunities to experience hurricanes here in our region. And so we have a mutual assistance group for utilities within the Texas region where we, again, know who's going to be available to assist who is going to step forward and offer their crews to be dispatched to those areas that are hardest hit, and work closely with them and have 2 meetings a year to make sure that the agencies are coordinated and that we've thought through how best to respond to each other. First, take care of our own facilities and take care of our own region, but when we've escaped the event, then we quickly gather our resources and get them standing by to be able to go return the service area of another utility. Mm-hmm. And we do that frequently.
Do you have an inventory of emergency backup resources, let's say, that all the hospitals have? You know that there's an inventory and who has what?
We do. We know which hospitals do have emergency generators. We have key account reps who work very closely with those facilities and are aware of how many days of fuel do they have, how many hours of fuel do they have, what can they sustain if, in fact, there is no utility available to them, what do they have the ability to sustain on site. So we pretty much work closely with them in advance, again, to make sure that they know that, we can't always be there as much as we'd like to. There are factors that get in the way, and so what can you do to be prepared until we can get there? There have been circumstances where we have actually had to assist. The damage to the system has been extensive, and we have assisted them in getting diesel fuel. We can't get our facility back up, but can we get them some diesel fuel through one of our contractors? Because we certainly have standby contracts for all kinds of assistance in advance that we might need to call upon during an emergency.
Mm-hmm. Is diesel and gas the primary backup that you're using, or do you have some renewable type resources, and why would you choose one over another?
Certainly at our those critical places, the fire stations, hospitals, emergency operations center, the primary backup today is diesel. In many of those facilities, though, especially the municipal buildings, we have renewable programs, specifically solar, available to spend some money getting solar onto the rooftops of those municipal buildings. And certainly we realize that as we get more and more of that deployed, we've got solar on about 1,000 facilities in Austin today. As more of that gets deployed, we know that that's going to become a resource for those types of facilities. We're in the process of designing and getting ready to construct our own new control center. We'll be relocating our primary one, and there will be solar as much as possible on the roof of that building. We'll have 2 dedicated feeds, but we know that we also want to have renewables on site in addition to those traditional diesel generators to sustain us as best we can.
Mm-hmm. Which there is then a disaster recovery component in adopting solar technology.
Yeah, absolutely. And people have said, well, what about hail? What about those problems? As many years as we've been supplying solar rebates back to our customers, we're not aware that we've had any cases of any damage to the solar facilities due to the hail, and hail is common in Central Texas. And so that's been a concern in an area where we've seen actually real positive feedback that customers are not saying that their facilities get